Hey, what's going on, everybody? And welcome back to the Rockman Power Hour. I'm Jason Rockman, and we're really excited today to be joined by somebody who, if you know rock and roll and if you're a fan of heavy metal, this guy's kind of been a mainstay in the metal world, and he did it all by playing a flute. And I'm talking about none other than Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull. He's going to be our guest today on the Rockman Power Hour. I am excited to be speaking with him, and this guy was known for not only his flute playing in rock and roll, but his storytelling through his music, his just insane frontman skills. And the guy was a force of nature when Jethro Tull started, and he's also known for dethroning Metallica at the Grammys, which was a great story too. But before I get too far ahead of myself, I would like to welcome Ryan Stick, my co-host, to the podcast. What's going on, Ryan?
It's going good today, man. It's a really cool interview with Ian, who I got to admit, like, there's this joke on that '70s show where they're like, "Hey, we're going to the Led Zeppelin concert," and Jackie says, "I want to go too. In fact, I think lead is hot," as if like Led Zeppelin's
Was it,
like the
is
a
it,
guy.
yeah,
And I thought all these years that Jethro Tull was
a
a guy
guy.
named Jeff.
Yeah.
But I but I was wrong, and Ian Anderson is very not much Jeff, and yeah, but it's a good one.
Yeah, no, Jethro Tull, it's funny because they're one of these bands that they kind of, I don't want to say they fly under the radar because they don't, because they definitely have their fan base, but they've always kind of walked that line between traditional rock and roll, prog, because a lot of people will consider them very progressive because of Ian's flute playing, because a lot of the arrangements. But the thing is, if you watch old footage of them live, they were really something else. Ian was a great front man, really enigmatic, a lot of energy, and you know the idea that someone played a flute in rock and roll music and made it cool, that alone is something else. And it was really fun to be able to chat with him because they've got a new album coming out, and he's someone who's always been on the road. He's always been touring, whether it be his solo stuff, whether it be back with Jethro Tull. But this is the first Jethro Tull album in quite some time, and it's just fun to think that a guy who's been doing this for as long as he has, and making the mark, on music the way he has, is still not only has something to say, but says it convincingly.
Absolutely, man. And I was looking up some Jethro Tull facts.
Mm.
I was like, well, if his name's not Jeff, who is Jethro Tull, and why are they naming this? And apparently, Jethro Tull was an English agriculturalist from the 1670s. That's pretty
Really?
cool. Yeah.
1670s. I
Well,
didn't
he
know.
was he was born in 1674,
Okay.
and he died in 1741. None
Wow.
of this has anything to do with Ian Anderson, but I think we're a little smarter right now for all knowing this.
I really appreciate that information. I had no idea. I mean, my introduction to Jethro Tull was through Shom. Growing up
Mm.
in Montreal, they were a band that we played all the time. And that I remember hearing Jethro Tull when I was younger. I remember hearing Aqualung. I remember, smoking dubs and listening to Thick as a Brick and all these records. And there's just something different about them that I always really appreciated. And I don't know. I was just when I got the opportunity to have Ian Anderson on the podcast, I was like, well, how do I not jump at that? Do you know what I mean? It's not every day you get to talk to someone like Ian Anderson, whose you know, influenced music in his own way, and just continues to have a steady output of music. Continues to have an influence on musicians. If you talk to a lot of up and coming musicians that are looking for something on the fringes of rock and roll, especially of classic rock, Jethro Tull is one of those bands. They kind of fall in that category where, if you know, you know. And I'm sure, I mean, I guess for you growing up, there must have been bands like that too.
Yeah, all I knew about Jethro Tull was that Metallica didn't win the Grammy, and
Yeah.
Jethro Tull got it. But like later in life, found out a little bit more. I remember seeing a performance of Jethro Tull in a Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus, and reading in Tony Iommi's book that he joined Jethro Tull for just a little bit right
Yeah.
before Sabbath really took off. But
Well,
he
they
he
they were they were a really like well respected arena rock band. They were a band that people, the musicians love them because they had great musicianship, and their live shows were ferocious, man. I mean, you watch some of that stuff from Ian in the 70s, and he was just like a ball of energy, man. Like, he commanded the whole audience. And it's cool. It's just cool when you think that the guy still has all the integrity and still has his wits about him. A lot of people that played in that era didn't survive that era. And, but I don't think he was a druggie. I don't think he was into substance from what I've heard. He wasn't someone that was into any of that stuff. He was all about the music.
Yeah, like when he spent all his time with a flute in his mouth, other people had pipes.
Yeah.
And it didn't go well. So, more flutes, everyone, less pipes.
I'd like to see you with a flute in your mouth. You're like, what? What did you just do?
No, I was just thinking, I'm like, do I make it worse? Because I have a comeback. But I'm like, I don't know.
Let's keep it clean. All right. Well, why don't we go right to this, because I'm excited for people to hear this. Check it out. Here's our conversation with Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull. All right. Really, really happy to have on the Rockman Power Hour with me today, Mr. Ian Anderson from the band Jethro Tull. I think one of the happiest emails I've gotten in the last little while is one hearing that you had a new album coming out, because it's been a minute.
Well, it's been a frustrating 4 years that I started work on the new album, which I decided should be released as a Jethro Tull album, because the guys in the band have been playing with me for on average 15 years, and it seemed appropriate that they should be recognized as performers on a record by Jethro Tull, having done hundreds and hundreds of concerts as Jethro Tull.
Right.
It was the first time that they would be on a Jethro Tull album. So I wrote it as a band album starting at 9 o'clock in the morning on the 1st of January in 2017. And I then wrote in the next 6 weeks, I suppose, I completed all the lyrics and the rough ideas of the song, made demos and sent it to the band, and they had all the material to rehearse with together, and then we went into the studio and recorded the first 7 songs, and I finished 4 of them in between tours that year. But I kept telling myself, "Oh, I'll finish the rest of it soon."
Right.
But of course, when you're on tour all the time, you get back for 2 or 3 nights before you go again. It didn't seem very fair to force the band into the studio and give up the little bit of private time they had with friends and family. So it kept getting put off. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. And that was really the end of, for the next year and a bit, that we couldn't get in the studio safely to work together. And I decided I should finish the album on my own, and then maybe ask some of the guys to contribute a little by sending in some audio files that they recorded in their home studios. And so it didn't get finished until, I suppose, around May, June this year. And that was a long time. It seems like a long time, but the total number of hours spent making the record are probably absolutely no more than we've ever spent in the past. It's just that they got split up over a long period of time. But nothing changed. The songs were all written in stone, if not tablets of stone, as in mine as the mountain, but they were written. And hardly anything changed from January, February 2017 until the final recording and the mixing took place. I might have changed the odd little one or two words,
right,
here and there, but some of those, quite often when you're singing a song and you misread your own lyrics and you sing perhaps the wrong word or in the wrong order, you sing something, a line of, and I at the end of it all, I did have to make tiny adjustments and changes to make sure the lyrics reflected exactly what I sung on the record. But basically, it's almost unchanged from the original Word document that I worked on and edited way back 4 years ago.
Is this, you mentioned that the guys were sending files and you guys were exchanging files back and forth from a safe distance. This is probably something that's more common for bands nowadays than ever. I mean, a lot of bands work that way. Before this, did you ever work this way with a band, or was it always, if you were recording, whether it be solo stuff, was it usually something that you preferred to be in a room and work it out, or had you been accustomed to doing this kind of recording before?
Well, I've done that kind of recording before as a guest artist with other people for years and years and years.
Yeah.
Even going back to analog times, I could still send a tape with my stuff on. But obviously in digital era recording technology, it's easier to do it. You can have something in somebody else's safe hands same day as you've done the recording. And so I've done it lots and lots of times, but it's not something I much prefer to combine the best of not old technology, but old recording methodology with modern technology. And so I like to get in the studio with the guys, rehearse everything properly, finalize the arrangements, and then we go in the recording studio to actually perform it live. And that's how this album, or at least 7 of the 12 tracks, were done that way. And so they do have they're played live together. Even the guitar solos were played live in the studio as we were recording. Right. They weren't overdubbed afterwards. So I think that conveys, some of the energy and the enthusiasm of the band for performing it like we would play live together on stage.
And speaking of energy and enthusiasm, there seems to be a lot of it on this record. I got a chance to sit with it a couple of times before we chatted today. And I had a smile came over me, because what I've always liked about Jethro Tull, and I work at Showme in Montreal. I'm a DJ at Showme FM, and we've I've been listening to your music as far back as I can remember. I'm going to be 51 years old, and I remember turning on the radio and hearing Jethro Tull as early as I can remember. So it's a staple in our playlist. It's a staple in the city. But there's always been this thing about Jethro Tull, where there's this energy in the music that's not like anything else that you really hear. And I don't know if that contributes to some of the instrumentation, but there seems to be that energy on this record. It just takes you somewhere. There's
smoke and mirrors. I'm a lethargic lump of lard but you do try to convey that, and it happens from the moment of writing a song. You write a line of lyrics, it already starts to suggest rhythm and meter. It might even imply a tempo. If you speak the words out loud, they begin to have cadence. They begin to be almost like the beginning of a melody, in terms of rising and falling. And so you have right from the beginning of the process, it does sort of develop a sense of movement, of building energy, and hopefully, if you work quickly as I do, then that energy is maintained throughout the process, and especially recording with the other guys. So the enforced gap between doing the first 7 songs and then my finishing the last 5 on my own was unfortunate, but in a way, I think the dynamic variation with the songs on this record remind me a little bit of Aqualung as an album, where there was some acoustic little pieces and then some loud rock band songs, and it had that kind of dynamic energy about it. It's sometimes getting the drummer to go on an extended tea break is quite a good idea.
There seems to be an aesthetic to this record too. I know we've gotten 2 videos, the second of which came out today, and then the album cover. I mean, it's you. It's you shirtless, and it makes an impact. Is there a theme throughout this record that transfers over to maybe the way the album cover looks, the videos? Is there something that's weaving through all of this?
Yes, well, it's implied very much in that title track. It's an album of songs about different human emotions, and some good, some bad, and the zealot gene is, I suppose, it in a way describes the polarization, the stark setting against people in society through populism in politics and the aggression in social media that people seem to want to exhibit in order to humiliate, to bully, to generally be rather unpleasant to each other. So it's about that. And I on the album cover set out to try to come up with a simple image that would reinforce that idea of polarization of black and white.
Mm-hmm.
And so I took the self-portrait, photographically speaking, I
Right.
deliberately lit it and developed it in a way that was punchy and with one side of the face in the dark and one side lit against a background where the reverse, black and white, makes up the background. And I wanted to keep it punchy. It just worked that way. And again, not having, because at the time I was doing the artwork, we were still not really in a place where I wanted to allow people in my home, photographers or video makers or other band members or whatever it might be. So I'm photography is something I've been doing since I was about 7, 8 years old, or maybe not quite 11, 12 years old. And it's part of the process, really. I do a lot of the promo stuff for the band, and so I'm quite used to that sort of technology too. But it's a punchy album cover, and
it is. It really is. I mean,
punchy title track that it would be easy to say, oh, he's talking about Donald Trump here. I mean, that's too easy. In fact, it's a compendium of characters. I could easily name at least 6 or 8 people in the world today, political leaders or national leaders whose populist policies are frighteningly dangerous.
Yeah,
I'm sure you can think of the same names too.
Oh, yeah.
But it's all about dividing people. And in a democracy, in a true democracy, like in your country or mine, or a pseudo democracy, like in some other countries, winning by a small margin is the reality of today.
Mm-hmm.
And so dividing people is a way of winning affiliation. And so you will find, I suppose, in those countries led by populist leaders, that they people love them or hate them.
Yeah.
In pretty much equal measure, but usually it tilts towards right-wing and traditional conservative values that even those who perhaps think this guy's really not a good leader, but he's all we've got.
Yeah.
And I think possibly that, there are the ardent Trump supporters, and then there are those who are dyed-in-the-wool ideological Republicans, but they wouldn't necessarily be comfortable voting for Donald Trump, but they want to maintain their Republican origins. And so in the USA, that would be the case. Canada's a much more liberal country altogether. And
yeah. Well,
I think there are many countries in Europe where coalition governments are the norm, but in my country and in the USA, it tends to be, pretty much divided.
Yeah, it's a very strange time we're living in, and it's funny because I have a lot of friends in the U.S. that tell me, this whole idea of having the American dream, where we're gonna have 2 good jobs, and we're gonna have a nice house, and we're gonna be taken care of. That seems to exist right now in Canada more than anywhere. In terms of North America. And it's interesting when they mention that to me, they're like, we'd kind of like to be where you are right now, because it seems like you have healthcare, you have education, you seem to have been okay throughout this whole pandemic. But yeah, it's an interesting world we live in. And I think going back now, and when we finish today, I'm going to go back and listen to the record now, knowing where you're coming from. And I'm sure a lot more things are going to jump out at me.
Well, the things that I would hope would jump out, as they jumped out for me, was when on day one of starting to work on a new project, I wrote down a list. I think I wrote down about 15 words that single words that suggested powerful emotions. So I had bad stuff like hate and jealousy and vengeance and greed and then some good stuff like different forms of love, fraternal love, erotic love, spiritual love, companionship, loyalty, compassion. You know, I made a list, and I looked at the list and I thought, oh, these are all the kind of words you find in the Bible. And so I then did a big search of biblical text and copied and pasted some reference points. I didn't include any biblical text in my lyrics,
Right.
but it was hovering in the background as a point of reference for some historical context. But I tried to make all, or nearly all, the songs relevant in the contemporary real world, or at least in recent history, in the case of Mrs. Tibbets. So I was trying to give them a relevance. I didn't want to write a song that was necessarily trying to put words that were written 2,000 or 3,000 years ago into a rock album. I didn't want to do that. So it'd be simplistic and wrong to say that this is an album inspired by the Bible. It uses references, but they're references from that I found, you know, to flesh out the one word topics that I started off with, you know, I think it gives me some mild intellectual pleasure to have a reason to have an album consisting of these songs under the same umbrella, under the same roof. You know, they're sitting together, all on different subjects, but that the common ground is that of strong human emotion.
Yeah. I'm gonna bring up a collaboration, because you were mentioning, you know, you've collaborated through the internet or through file sharing for years. I'm gonna bring up a collaboration that I'm pretty sure no one's brought up in a while, but it's one that's stuck with me ever since I first heard it, and it's this record. Do you remember doing?
Well, funnily enough, in my very last interview,
someone brought it up. Damn.
About 30 minutes ago. We talked about that very same thing. And
were they Canadian as well?
No, it was somebody in the US.
Oh, nice.
Was, familiar with that album, and but yes, I heard the previous single, The Safety Dams, and it was quite a big hit in the UK, and it was a great video I saw on TV, and I was immediately struck with that, because it was at a time when maybe the hippie dream was pretty much truly dead, but this was like sort of sparking up a kind of a vision of almost like a hippie innocence of people dancing and cavorting, in a rural country scene, and it was a breath of fresh air amidst all the synth pop of that of that era.
Yeah.
So I must have said somewhere in some interview or something, I must have uttered publicly that I was quite a fan of that album and the band. If it was a band, it was really just one man and his girlfriend who turned up in London and asked me to play on a track on a new record, which I was pleased to do. I mean, it's a lovely song.
It really is. It really is.
So it's just a nice little, slightly romantic and nostalgic little piece that I thought was quite fun.
So Ivan is a friend of mine, and I'm a big Men Without Hats fan ever since I'm a kid, and I remember that.
Well, to me, the reason that stuff works is it's a very skillful, perhaps not entirely thought through, but it works out as being intelligent pop music that is a very careful balance. It seemed like a very crafted balance between electronica and some quite timeless melodies and words. And I huge admirer of his songs. I think it's and I did actually do a search on Ivan recently to see what Men Without Hats, if it still existed as a live performing band, and I was pleased to see that he was out there doing things, and obviously not perhaps in the last couple of years, but certainly seemed to be alive and well and kicking, in the sense of having a place in the firmament of pop and rock music.
Yeah, no, they're still going.
Well, please pass on my my best wishes, and
I will, for sure.
How much I enjoyed performing on his song,
and I enjoyed hearing it, and it's a line that I often whistle. I'm a pretty good whistler. I wanted to ask you, there's something very special about the live presentation of Jethro Tull. I've yet to see you live, but everything that I've seen online, lends me to believe that a Jethro Tull show, even now, is very, very energetic. Have you been putting together visuals for hopefully upcoming dates?
We have used, to an increasing extent, we have used video. I mean, we first did it back in 1973 using a projector and a big screen. Not all the way through the show, but in a couple of points. But we have probably since 2012, it's been a regular feature of our production shows. Where we travel with more equipment, and we also, of course, play some generic performances outdoors, playing generic Jethro Tull repertoire without any bells and whistles, just us on a stage, which is sometimes what you have to do, particularly outdoors, where sometimes it's not safe to erect screens and where it's not part of a promoter's budget to pay all that extra money for video walls and all the rest of it. But we do quite a lot of that, and of course we have to generate new original video material for the set list that's applicable to a given tour. And we started that for the 2020 series of concerts, which was a revisiting of some of the more, for me, the milestones, the stepping stone points, really, to the, broadly speaking, progressive rock songs of Jethro Tull. Things that for me were key songs where I was making a definite move to explore something a little different, but within the broad genre of progressive rock. And so we devised a video show, which we only were able to play twice, once in Barcelona, once in Madrid. Then we flew to Helsinki for a tour of Finland, only to find out by the time we checked into the hotel that the government had come out of a meeting and cancelled all public gatherings due to COVID infections suddenly appearing and rising. And that was the end of it until July of this year. Actually, no, August of this year, when at the end of August, we finally managed to do a couple of live concerts for the first time in a year and a half, and played 2 outdoor shows in Germany and then in Switzerland. And we did a bunch of indoor shows, slightly nervously. But we all test every 48 hours and try to make sure that we minimize our social contacts outside the bubble of band and crew.
Right.
And we've been. Last week I was playing, doing some fundraisers in 3 of England's great cathedrals, and as always, I'm trying my best to be very careful not to catch COVID, because I have underlying health conditions which make me, in the vulnerable category should I be infected. And of course, I'm vaccinated, triple vaccinated now, have a booster dose too. But I have to get on a plane next week to fly to Rome to do the Vatican Christmas concert, big TV special. And I should be pretty nervous about it, because it's all right if I'm playing with a big orchestra and some other soloists and many other artists. But the point is they can spend all of their time wearing an FFP2 or N95 or N99 face mask, something of quality that will give them a degree of protection and give others protection from them. Whereas a flute player can't do that.
No, I can imagine that.
It's impossible to play the flute with a mask on. Nothing, right. No noise at all comes out. Just a pathetic sort of fluffy bleating noise. And so I do have to be unmasked and perform. Yeah. And if you're doing that on 2 hours of a Jethro Tull concert, it's 2 hours of aerobics, and I probably am breathing 4 times for everybody else's one breath. And of course, it makes me a little nervous. You're standing in front of, let's say a couple of thousand people in a theater, and statistically, it's likely that there's going to be 30, 40 people who have COVID in that audience, whether they know it or not.
Right.
And I think it's very unlikely that any of us will not have encountered the SARS-CoV-2 virus and its variants at some point, in the months to come, as the new variant, which is seemingly very contagious, is kicking off in a big way here. So then every time I see a notification from our government website that advises us on travel rules and entry rules into other countries, that I get 2 or 3 a day.
Yeah.
Everywhere is instituting further degrees of control, and I have to take 3 tests, one to go to Italy, one while I'm there in order to return from Italy, and another one
when you
2
arrive.
days after I get back.
Yeah.
So I bought and paid for 3 tests yesterday, and I'm dreading that Italy introduces more restrictions. So I was supposed to do the Vatican concert last year, but they introduced a restriction imposing a 5-day quarantine on all travelers from the UK. And so I was, obviously, I can't go there and do 5 days quarantine in a hotel.
No.
It's, I might never get out again, because you've got to do a PCR test to be released. And it gets a little bit scary, because you might well have picked up COVID in that time, as has happened in several quarantine hotels in different parts of the world. So, yeah, I'm naturally just very cautious about it all. But I accept the fact that probably sooner or later I am going to get COVID. And I just hope that with the benefits of hopefully a low viral load in the first place, and the benefit of triple vaccination and the benefit of medication, if it gets that bad that I have to go into hospital, then I would hope reasonably to survive. My daughter, who was double vaccinated, she came down with COVID a few weeks ago, and she was really pretty ill.
Right.
And I know several people who've been fully vaccinated and still caught COVID and suffered quite a bit. But I met somebody just the other day. It was one of my guests in one of the cathedral shows who'd tested positive for COVID and had basically no symptoms at all.
Yeah,
whereas his wife was quite seriously ill, but he kind of got away with it, even though he tested positive. So it affects different people different ways, and I would hope that when it comes my turn to get a positive test result, then I will do as I am told to do, and self-isolate and keep away from everybody, including my family, and hide out until hopefully the worst of it is over.
Well, I'm pulling for you, and I think you're going to be okay. And I think we'll all get through this. But I agree with you. Every artist.
Well, my days are brightened by the fact that I can now buy an N95 mask in sexy black. So you only come in white, you see. But all the band and crew, we all wear quality masks, no silly face coverings or cotton or silly. We wear something that's giving us a bit of a fighting chance, and a degree of social distancing, because on stage I'm very careful as a flute player not to play my flute straight into the face of our guitarist.
Right.
It projects a long way, about 3 meters, in fact, of very, very concentrated plume of fine aerosol droplets exudes from my flute. So you don't want to be on the receiving end of that.
I was just going to say, I'm sure whoever gets your flute when you walk off stage and you hand your flute after playing it, I'm sure.
Oh, I never hand it to anybody. No. No one touches my flute. I think I've allowed people to pick up my guitar as long as they pick up the stand that it's on. They don't touch the guitar.
But no one touches your flute.
It's been like that for years and years and years. I mean, I never let people touch my flute. Oh, absolutely. It's a very fragile instrument, with a lot of complex key work. And so you really don't want people to be getting hold of it, because they might grip it too tightly and damage it, or very probably, they're going to leave some telltale bit of greasy fingerprints on it. And I'm always been an inveterate hand washer. So the last thing I do before I walk on stage, I wash my hands carefully with soap and water. So I walk on stage at least with clean hands, and hope that my flute does not get greasy. And because the biggest enemy of a flute is oil and grease that causes keywork to stick and pads to get stuck down and that sort of thing. So nobody touches my flute, and that's the way it's always been.
Ian, I appreciate you taking the time to chat today. I think people are really going to dig the record. I'm excited to get off and listen to it now with a better understanding. And I think when people get a chance to hear our chat, they'll probably have a better understanding going into hearing it. So, but again, just good to hear Jethro Tull putting out a record again, even though it was a bit of excuse my language, clusterfuck to get it done. But you got it past the finish line, and I think people are really going to appreciate it.
Well, I hope so, and I think most people will just listen to it as music. It matters little to them as to what lay behind it in terms of a process of making this, writing the songs and so on. But I know there are always those fans who are really like to know the details.
Yeah.
So I decided after a lot of thought that I would put all that detail into the booklet and the contents of the albums and be prepared to talk about it. But I think for most people, it's just peripheral. It's you either like the songs or you don't. You don't necessarily have to examine them in detail and consider carefully where the lyrics come from. And I think that's an added bonus if you're fastidious enough in your concerns as to the background to do that. But at the end of it, it's got to work as a piece of pop music, really, which is pop rock is kind of, I suppose, what it is for the most part.
I guess I'm one of the fastidious ones.
Well, it's I mean, me too. I like to have a rationale. I like to have a reason for doing something. I like to have it, kind of in my head that this is why I'm doing it. This is what it's about. And, so yes, for me, it's kind of important, but I think it's equally maybe a little foolish to assume that other people feel the same way, and certainly to force upon them the more intellectual standpoint as something that, will meet with a certain degree of resistance. And I absolutely understand why. I am altogether, far too inward looking and anal about my own music and compositions. I think other people should just have fun.
Just put it on and listen to
it. Just shred it, or in the modern world, just hit delete on your phone or computer. It's easy to get rid of now. Easy if you don't like it, delete.
Yeah, delete. Ian, thanks so much for taking the time. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting today. Wow, that was really cool. What'd you think of that?
I think on the cover of his new album, I'm surprised the album wasn't called Eisenberg because he looks just like Walter White on it. Like you really. Yeah, there's a resemblance, man. I think that's pretty cool. In fact, it makes Jethro Tull even more endearing to me now. So yeah.
Yeah. So the cover of the record, as we spoke about in the interview, is a pretty honest portrait of Ian, and it's really, really cool. The album's called The Zealot Gene, and it's available now. And I think Jethro Tull fans are really going to dig this record, man. I think they're really going to dig this album.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to hearing it. And it was it was a deep interview, but like that's the best thing about this long form. And like I've seen you do interviews for years, and the junkets, sometimes you have like, your 3 questions, get in, get out, 5 minutes. It seemed like Ian was in no rush to finish this conversation, and that was really nice.
Super generous with his time. And the band's trying to get their tour done. And as you heard in the interview, Ian's super concerned about the current state of the world in terms of health measures and stuff. And he's posted that, he can't meet any fans. He's going to be staying in his bubble. And I think with him, he's got a lot of pre-existing health conditions that he's nervous about. And I think anyone at his age, I get it, but I think fans are just going to be excited to go see him live. And I do hope we get a date here in Canada at one point. It was a really, really good, be really fun to see Jethro Tull live. Especially the fact that he's got the band back and it's not just him, but I love when he was talking about his flute. Like, do you hand your flute to somebody? He's like, I don't give my flute to anyone. I'm like, what? Like, I didn't know like flautists were so possessive or paranoid about giving their flute to anyone. And I get that,
Well, it's not exactly like a big heavy guitar or something like that. Not that guitars are heavy, but after playing it for 2 hours, maybe you want to put it down. Something fascinating to me. Every time someone I know is really good at guitar, they don't needlessly carry it around unless it's a very expensive guitar, of course, but they
Sure.
don't needlessly carry it around because they don't have to prove to anybody that they're a guitar player at all times. But
Yeah.
even though Ian doesn't let a lot of people carry his flute, I'm hard pressed to think that he carries it around outside just to remind people he's in Jethro Tull. I really doubt that. He
Yeah,
seems to be
no.
a pretty proficient player from day one.
Yeah, I think to him, it's his instrument and it's a personal thing. And I understand it, like a guitar, you're playing with your hands, but a flute, you're playing with your mouth, and that's it's a pretty personal area. You don't share your mouth with depending who you are, but if you're sharing your mouth or whatever you're putting your mouth
Especially
on
not
with anyone,
now. Especially
yeah,
not now. Like the very idea of me having to play a flute and 100, even 5 people putting their gummy hands all over right before I got put
no,
my mouth on it for 2 hours
no
gives
bueno.
me gives me the heebie-jeebies just thinking about it. What he said about the spit valve, or just how he has to be really careful that
Yeah.
his guitar player isn't there, so he doesn't have to get all this spit shot coming out of the flute.
Yeah.
All these things I learned about the flute today, man.
Yeah, well, that's it. If you're going into an assembly in a high school and you're worrying about spreading anything, don't bring a flute player because they're just gonna, they're gonna infect the entire place. But man, it was really, really fun to talk to him. New album comes out January 28th, so make sure people go check out the Zealot Gene. It's available on Century Media Records, and I'm just really grateful that we got to talk to Ian. So, Ryan, next week on the show, we have got someone really cool. Were you ever a fan of Incubus?
I'm very aware of Incubus, and I, of course, know the song "Wish You Were Here."
Yeah, huge hit.
Yeah, huge hit. Funny enough, actually, I was familiar with Incubus for the first time because there's a show on Much Music called "So You Want to Be a Rock Star," where they recreate the music video with
Yep.
fans.
Oh,
and
wow.
these people were so jazzed to be there that their love for Incubus was kind of infectious. And that's how I finally started to be, because I was a punk kid. I was just some dickhead who was just like, "It's not Rancid, fuck off."
Yeah.
But as I grew older and my brain grew and I got out of my own ass each and every year, my musical horizons grew. So yeah.
I'm excited to have Brandon Boyd on the show. He's not only is he a great musician, he's also a great artist. So we're going to talk all about that. We're going to talk about his solo album that's coming out soon, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So I just want to take a minute to thank you, Ryan, my co-host, for always being here with me. Thanks for all the support, and it's always it's always fun to be able to come on here, and I never take that for granted. Want to thank our producer, Julia Kedzierski, our guest, Ian Anderson, and don't forget all the things you need to do. Follow our podcast. Go down below, subscribe, and follow us, and you will be alerted every time we have a new podcast that drops. I'd like to thank my guest, June, the dog, who was with us today, briefly in and out of the kitchen and in of the back of the podcast studio, and all of you for being a part of this. It's been a great journey, and it's going to continue to be a great journey. So we will see you next week on the Rockman Power Hour.